Good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's workshop, Leading Change, Bringing Others with You and Overcoming Resistance to Change. First, I would like to start by thanking our distinguished presenter, Randy Pennington, for sharing his insights and expertise with us today. Randy's experience in leadership and development makes him the perfect guide for this important session. A big thank you as well for all of you for joining us today. Your presence reflects your commitment to leadership and growth. Leadership development is about understanding what it takes to walk with people into the unknown and uncertainty and build a better world. Changing is a constant, yet it often comes with a price. What psychologists call change fatigue. And while change is inevitable, it's people who often makes it the hardest part of the process. Why? Because people resist change. Sometimes people claim they are committed, but they cling to old habits and behavior. In response, leaders often resort to force or authority to enact change. While this may lead to compliance in the short term, it rarely fosters the kind of true commitment that drives long-time success. But really, what's really behind this resistance? People actually don't change, just loss. It's not the change itself, but the fear of what they stand to lose that fuels resistance. These losses come in many forms, such as freedom, status, belonging, or fairness. At the core of these losses, when change challenges our identity, resistance becomes even stronger. The key to overcoming resistance lies in understanding this deeper connection. People are more open to change when they know what will stay the same. While envisioning a bright new future is important, it's only half of the equation. We also need to provide reassurance about what will continue the same. As leaders, we must ask ourselves when change is inevitable and the loss seems on the horizon, how do we guide ourselves and others through this? How do we create an environment where people feel secure enough to embrace the unknowns? As risk managers and risk leaders in this initiative, our responsibilities go even beyond just humanity. We are at the forefront of driving change. And driving change means reshaping mindsets, a task that is even as challenging as it is important. And driving change means reshaping mindset that is very difficult to do. Changing mindset requires empathy. It's not about forcing compliance, but about inspiring true commitment to a shared vision. This is why role is so important. We're not only responsible, but also for guiding people through the whole transformation process, helping them see both the opportunities in change and the constants they rely on. So these questions and challenges are going to be the heart of today's workshop. Randy will help us explore how to lead change with empathy, inspire through commitment, and turn resistance into a powerful force for growth. So before I hand it to Randy, the members of this initiative would like to thank Randy, and they nominate one of them to speak on their behalf for a quick second. I hope you don't mind. Go ahead, Dave.
Good evening, everyone. Can you see and hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good evening, everyone, again. My name is Taif, a fresh graduate of Imam Hamad bin Saud Islamic University. On behalf of all of us here, I would like to extend a warm welcome to Mr. Randy. We are truly honored to have you with us today as part of the Risk Leader Initiative. This initiative is aimed at fostering leadership, innovation, and strategic thinking in the field of risk management. Your expertise and insight align perfectly with our goals. Your contributions to the field have been inspiring to us, and we are eager to learn from your wealth of experience. We want to sincerely thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to speak with us today. It's a privilege to have you guide us in this journey, and we are all looking forward to your lecture. Once again, thank you, Mr. Randy, for being here today. The floor is now yours.
Thank you very much. What an honor. What a very nice thing to say. I appreciate it. Thank you all so much for having me this evening. It is the middle of the day almost where I am. The fact that I am coming to you and we're meeting your evening, my middle of the day, I live in Texas. Um, and the fact that we're doing this today is sort of proof to me of the amazing time in which we live. The fact that so much change has happened that now allows us to get together to discuss ideas is truly inspiring. So thank you so much for the opportunity. It is the honor is mine, and I appreciate it. I This will be as much a conversation, hopefully, as it is a presentation and lecture. So if you have questions that come up in the chat, or come up right now, you can put them in the chat. We'll make sure that we honor those and get to those. There will be time for Q&A at the end of the session as well. I'll leave hopefully about 10 or 15 minutes to be able to do that. But if something comes up that you're thinking, please put it in the chat. By the way, if something comes up with that you don't agree with, that's okay too. Please put that out there, because there's value in the discussion and digging deeper. So I'm going to start with a little bit of a hypothetical question. And that is, what does a snail say when riding on the back of a tortoise? And the answer is, whee, because perspective matters. Now, when you think about that, when you look at that graphic, and I hope that you can see the graphic up there now, when you look at that, that is very much a graphic. First off, it is a joke that you can tell in any situation, which is one of the reasons why I use it. But more important, the meaning is crucial for understanding how change works. Uh, how we experience change is relative. One of the things that I do in my career is I work in the MBA program at Southern Methodist University in Dallas, where I live. And one of the things that when I find in talking to the MBA students is that what people in my generation, by the way, all my gray hair is real. It's not painted in for effect. I'm not trying to look older. I've been doing this a long, long time. But one of the things that I find is what seems like dramatic change to me, the MBA students that I interact with have a different word for it. They call it normal. Because to them, that is all they have experienced. Now, I think there's a lesson for us as we think about leading change within the organizations that we serve, is that for many of you, if you're just beginning in your career, you're ready to run fast. That's how you see the world. That's all you've ever experienced. As people become older from a generational standpoint, the the way they look at change changes, if you will. We were speaking before we started. 30 years ago, I remember people talking about this is so much change. There's so much change going on. That was about the time that the book Who Moved My Cheese came out. And when that book came out, everyone said, oh, change is happening so quickly. Well, it's only sped up, and it will only continue to speed up unless there's a total meltdown in the world. Now, if there's a total meltdown, if the world completely stops, that will delay change, but that in itself will be a change. So I want you to understand from an influence perspective. And by the way, leadership is all, in my view, all about influence. We can influence through power of the position, or we can influence through the credibility that we earn. But the way people look at change will be different based on their perspective. I want to also offer this, that one of my goals tonight is to make your brain hurt a little bit. Not in a bad way, but in a good way. It's because the mind stretched by the possibility and the potential of a new big idea never fully returns to its original shape. So I want to stretch our minds a little bit this evening, and that stretch is this, is that as I look at risk management and risk assessment, it's at its core asking people to change based on what could happen. Now, there's a caveat to that. If you're doing risk recovery, then the change has already happened. But if you're thinking about proactive change, we're asking people to change based on what could happen. And to be effective, you have to influence people to value and trust your recommendations, to do what they have not seen as a compelling need in the past.
Randy, are you sharing something?
Yeah, let me share again just to make sure.
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. Sorry about
Okay.
that. By the way, just so you'll know, there you go. I wanted you to be able to see that graphic. All right, I wanted everyone to see that because it is first off, it cost a lot of money to create that graphic, and so I want people to see it whenever I can. But the idea is to be effective in change, you have to be able to influence, to value you, to see something, and to trust your recommendations, even though they haven't been quite done that in the past. Now, the organizations that you work with are perfectly aligned, structured, and operating to achieve exactly the results that they're achieving today. Therein lies an opportunity for you to influence change. Let's make an assumption that if you're doing risk, if you're trying to become more proactive, and we are going to talk a little bit later on about where I've looked at your profession and where I see some opportunities to go into the future. The organizations that we work with are aligned and structured to achieve exactly the results that they're achieving today. Now, therein lies both a challenge and an opportunity for us in influencing change. If we're dealing with leaders at the top of organizations who are perfectly content with how things are going right now, there's less opportunity for them to be open to change. If the organization is in crisis, there's greater opportunity to deal with change effectively. So again, it's part of the perspective that matters. But as you mentioned in the opening comments, and I loved it, by the way, your opening comments, Fadia, we could have just stopped there. It was truly an excellent recap. But if we want things to be different, and that is what you're doing with risk assessment and risk mitigation, especially, is we're asking things to be different, to be better, to be different. And now we have to drive people through change to be able to do that. So here's what my goal is for today. One, I want to share with you some principles of change that allow you to bring people with you. Now, notice that I said principles of change, not steps to follow. And that is because one of the things that I've learned is that if I understand principles, the steps are more likely to reveal themselves based on the situation. I have probably led well over 100 different change initiatives for my clients in my career. No two of them are exactly the same. The steps and sequence aren't exactly the same. And yet 80% of them are all the same. They're just all the same differently. So I want to share with you some principles. The second thing is I want to talk a little bit about how to deal with and overcome resistance. And third is I want to give you some insights from an outside perspective, someone from outside your industry and profession, of where risk leaders need to go and focus in the future. So let me ask a question. A quick thumbs up or an okay in the chat is fine. If you could walk away from our time this evening with these three, with ideas on these three, would this have been worth your time? Yes, I'm seeing some yeses. Good, thank you. So let's go into it. Some principles around change. I want to reveal these all at once and then we'll go through them individually. First off, people change for their reasons, not yours. Now, as a risk leader in the organization, realize that many of the people that you're trying to influence have different perspectives, different goals, and one of the most important skills that we'll ever learn to lead change is to listen and understand what others want to accomplish. The second, and this is something you mentioned, we can mandate compliance. Commitment is volunteered. The third, people support what they help create, and no one ever argues with their own ideas. Now, from those four, we start to see some themes emerge. Part of influencing change, if you're not at the top of the organization, is that you'll have to achieve buy-in. Buy-in is the holy grail, if you will, of change efforts, is how do we get buy-in? Even if you're at the top of the organization, even if you have the ability to mandate compliance, there's no guarantee that individuals will give you their volunteered commitment, which I look at and define as the extra discretionary effort. In fact, when we mandate compliance, there's no guarantee that people will follow through when we aren't looking. So, by the way, we know this from our live. Would it be safe to say we all agree that it is forbidden for teenagers to be sneaking out of the house at night? Is that a safe assumption? Is that something we wouldn't want to have happen? And I think the answer is yes. And most of you don't have your screens on, so I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand. But even though we know that as parents, we can say, don't sneak out of the house at night, there are things that you will be doing that will violate our values, get us in trouble, a whole list of things. Teenagers continue to do that anyway. And for some, when they are caught and punished, they stop doing it. For others, when they are caught and punished, they just get better at sneaking out. And that becomes the challenge of mandating compliance, is that commitment, is that volunteered discretionary effort and energy and support. So how do we help people do that? One is people support what they help create. The more we can get people involved in either crafting the change or crafting the implementation, the better. Second is no one ever argues with their own ideas. So let me give you a quick example of that one. A few years back, I was asked to create the strategic vision for an entire community for 25 years looking forward. And it was a community-wide effort where my job was, one of the tools that we used was community engagement, to ask people what their vision was for this community. And it was a nice sized community, about 100,000 people, not a large city, but certainly not a small town. And one of the people that I first interviewed was a retired colonel from the US military. Now, for reference, colonels in the US military are stereotypically noted for believing they have all the right answers. I'm sure there's no one like that in your life or your organization either. But this gentleman came in and said, I want you to know, I think this is a bad idea. It's nothing about you personally. I've never met you. I'm sure you're very competent at what you do. I think this is the wrong answer. We are the leaders. He was one of the elected leaders in the community. We are the leaders. It's our job to set the vision. We shouldn't allow people, we shouldn't even bother to ask people what their vision for the future is, because it's our job to know that. Now, at one level, you can say that is true. That is the job of a leader. If you think about it from a community, an elected leader should be that person who does that. The leader in a corporation or in an organization certainly has the power to set the vision and move us forward. But then I asked the question of him. I said, first off, you're exactly right. Now, that's important. First off, you're exactly right. You have the ability to do this. Would you rather have that decision be supported or resisted? Was the question that I asked. And when I asked that question of him, one of the things that he told me is, well, obviously I want people's support. And I said, okay, so here's the difference between the military and civilian life. In the military, you have the power of the rank in the military to drive that change. In the civilian world, we have to rely on people volunteering their commitment to us. And once he understood that concept, things began to change for him. By the way, at the end of the project, he came back and apologized and said, I was absolutely wrong. This was the right thing to do and the right way to do it. Thank you very much. So I appreciate him from that standpoint. But as we deal with people in authority, because many times we are influencing up the organization as well as down and across, we have to help people support their goal and involve them in the creation. Next two principles. People do not change because of intellectual understanding. They change because of emotional readiness. And crisis pushes people to change. Opportunity pulls people to change. These two things, I think, are critically important as we understand what it means to bring people with us on a change. That first one, intellectual understanding does not drive change. Some years ago here in the United States, I was honored to be elected as the chairman of the board for a not-for-profit group called the American Heart Association. We raise money for research and fund programming for cardiovascular disease and stroke prevention. I was involved with that organization for a number of years. I was chairman of the board for the state of Texas, where I lived. So we had, I don't know, about 5,000 active volunteers across the organization, many of them doctors and physicians and cardiologists and nurse practitioners, as well as lay people like myself. And during my year as chair, I traveled across the state of Texas, and I talked to people in groups as small as 5 or 6 or as large as 500 or 600. I always began my presentations with these 3 questions. I'll ask you the same 3. First off, do you know that you should eat healthier than you eat today? Do you know that you should exercise more than you exercise today? And finally, if you smoke tobacco, do you understand that that is harmful to your health? So the answer to all 3 of those things is yes. And yet people continue to eat unhealthily, not exercise enough, and do things that harm their cardiovascular health. And the reason why is understanding isn't readiness, which then leads to that next point. How do we create readiness? And this is the ultimate piece of buy-in. How do we create readiness and realize that crisis pushes people to change? Crisis creates readiness. On the other hand, opportunity pulls people to change. Now, as I thought about that statement from a risk perspective, again, here is the challenge. If there's a crisis, use it. Many leaders for centuries have said, never waste a good crisis. On the other hand, if we wait for crisis, then chances are we've waited too late. We've almost violated the inherent goal of risk management, and that is to prevent crisis. The reason why you move your computing to cloud servers is to prevent crisis. The reason why we do risk mitigation in our physical plants is to prevent crisis. The reason why we plan for what would happen with a natural disaster is to prevent crisis. Every year, organizations go through strategic planning processes, and many of them use the typical SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. The threats are always, at least in my experience, underemphasized. In 2019, in the fall of 2019, I conducted a number of strategic planning efforts for my clients. And as we did our SWOT analysis, one of the things that I can promise is worldwide pandemic never appeared on anyone's threat list. And so crisis is a great motivator for change, but if we wait until crisis, chances are we've waited too long. So let's talk about what these mean for you. First off, we can mandate change, but that doesn't ensure commitment. We can even ask our leaders to mandate change. That doesn't ensure commitment. Sometimes what it ensures is people will become more clandestine in their resistance. And we see that in organizations, not through what's said in the meetings, but it's what's said after the meetings. It's the meeting after the meeting is where those conversations come up. And what will end up happening is we'll get sort of quiet resistance, if you will. And that quiet resistance shows up in people supporting change in name only. They'll nod their heads and say the right words, but they don't show the commitment afterwards. So, with that in mind, part of the way we bring people with us, and I want to unpack these as we go through, is work to involve people at every level. And if you can't involve them in the need to change, involve them in how the change will be implemented. The comment was made early on that people resist because they lose something. They lose their freedom, their identity, their status, um, all those things. Most of what they lose is control. You see, I believe we don't have a problem changing. I believe that we have problems with being out of control. You and I change every day. If a new piece of technology comes out, we change. And if I don't know if any of you are golfers, play golf or not, but you know, I I own golf clubs, but I'm not sure you would describe what I do as playing golf. It's a reasonable facsimile, I think, probably of the actual game. But I see people out on the driving range practicing their golf swing all the time, and they're always changing, they're always tweaking. See, we don't like being out of control, but we do like being better. And that becomes the opportunity for us to bring people with us is maybe we shouldn't talk about change as much as the opportunity to be better. If you ask people, do you like change? They'll say no. If you ask people, do you want to be better at your job? Do you want our company to be more profitable? Do you want our community to be more successful? Do you want our society to thrive and flourish? The answer is yes. We want all of those things. Well, some of that means that we're going to have to be different, and we can involve people in how. Next idea for you. The easiest time to secure change will be after a well-publicized crisis. Now, on a daily basis, here's I hate to sort of rejoice in the misery of others. That's not something we want to do. But if if another company in your industry has a crisis that could have been avoided through effective risk management and assessment and preparation, don't hesitate to share that news. Don't hesitate to share how they responded. Don't hesitate to share what they might have done differently, including the fact that we don't want that to happen to us. Now, don't wait until the crisis happens. I mean, you do that as a normal course of your business because it continues to raise awareness that change happens and that we have to be prepared for it. Creating opportunity is always the bigger challenge with change. So in creating opportunity, the challenge will be, how do we align risk management, risk assessment, risk preparation with growing the business? Because when you think about it, at its most basic level, risk is how to prevent damage to the business. Truthfully, most business leaders or many business leaders are not aware. They don't think that way. They're thinking forward. They're thinking how to grow businesses. And so showing the opportunity of preserving the business, preserving our ability to grow is a challenge. So with that, let me stop for a moment and ask, before we talk about resistance, let me stop and ask, what questions do you have at this point?
Maybe if we leave the questions to the end, maybe we can allow them to ask because the chat
Okay,
is off.
okay, good. We'll leave it to the end. Um, this is one of my very favorite things that I've come up with over the years. I developed this model actually in the early 90s for how change happens in large organization or how to make change successful. John Cotter wrote in the early 90s that 70% of change efforts fail to achieve their desired result. Since that time, the number of books, articles, speeches, presentations, workshops, all those things have exploded. And the statistics are today that we're still only about 70% of change efforts fully achieve all their goals. Now, I won't tell you that all of the change efforts that I've led are 100% successful. I will tell you that the statistics are much better than 30%. And the reason why is I don't want you to think about change as the steps to follow. Think about change as what needs to be accomplished. And that's very important. There are steps to follow, but there's also, if we focus on the accomplishment, that provides the ability to adjust the steps as needed. So, at the heart of every successful change, I want you to link everything that you do to the mission, vision, and values of the organization. Now, some organizations, by the way, now are moving away from the term mission and vision. And at least in this country, you're seeing the word purpose show up more often. Um, I think of purpose and mission almost as interchangeable in how I think about it. Sometimes language matters, but everything that we do links back to those things. And then from there are four things that we have to accomplish. The very first one is this: align process, structure, and systems. Structure and systems and process create habits in organizations. And habits drive the culture and they define how we look, how we do things over time. Um, I hear people speak a lot about a culture of risk management, a culture of safety, a culture of customer connection, everyone has their culture. My belief is that from an organization standpoint, the only culture that matters is the one that allows us to achieve the results that you want to achieve. Now, we start from there, everything else falls into place. And there are processes, structures, and systems that, that reinforce what those beliefs and values are. So the first thing I want you to think about is what are all the processes, structure, and systems? If I'm looking at it from a risk management standpoint, if I see a process that needs to be changed, what created that process? What purpose does it serve? It's looking at everything that we do and then now asking, how do we make sure that's aligned with where do we want to go? I'm spending some time on this one because I believe in most organizations dealing with change, aligning process, structure, and system is sometimes an afterthought. The second thing I want you to focus on, most people think of, we have to build urgency and support and capacity. And that is true. But I actually think the next thing to focus on is what are the metrics? What are the measurable goals and metrics that you want to achieve? There are only three things that we can manage in organizations, or that we can measure, in organizations. We can measure activities, results, and perceptions. Activities, what people do on a daily basis. Results, what are the outcomes? Perceptions, how do people feel about it? Um, most, most metrics on change focus on results and perceptions. But realize those are lagging indicators of success. The area where I want you to focus more is what are the activities that we need to take place. If we're making this change happen, what are the activities that we need to see on a regular basis to make sure that we're moving in the right direction? If we wait until results come in or perceptions to be developed, we will have missed the opportunity to influence those through activities. Remember, results and perceptions lagging indicators, activities leading indicators. Here's why that becomes important with change. The question that goes on in many minds, in minds is when we announce a change, is what will be different and how will we know? The quicker we can answer that question, the easier it is actually to get people interested and open to listening. So instead of saying, we want to change how we manage this risk, consider changing the language a little bit to, we want to improve our ability to respond to a natural disaster when it happens. Because if you tell people, you want to change how you manage risk? Maybe, but perhaps not. But if you want people to say, would you like to improve our ability? I want us to have the ability to survive a natural disaster or to survive a cyber attack or to survive this, because that's in the news now, it's happening everywhere. You share that goal too, correct? And that's an opportunity to bring people with you. From there, then you can start to build urgency, support, and capacity. The urgency is how you create energy around the change. Leaders create urgency through the attention that they place on the change. So from a practical matter, if I'm leading a change from a risk profile, I want visible leaders to regularly share why this change is important. Now, if that visible leader is you, perfect. If that visible leader is someone else in the organization, that means you'll have to go back and get support from that, create urgency from that. And the tendency of leaders is to say, I'll send a memo, I'll send an email, I'll do a video chat, I'll mention it at a town hall meeting, I'll say it once. History indicates that reading or hearing something once will not create urgency for change. If we send an email, there's a chance that the change will get buried in our email. I don't know about you, but I get 100 to 200 emails a day. It's easy for things to be overlooked in the course of doing my regular work. So the support and urgency, you'll need support from people in the organization who are influencers, and we need them to say things more than once. We need it to become a regular update. We need it to become part of the metrics that we share in meetings. And then also, you're looking for change champions. We want people who are respected in the organization for change or for doing the right thing and for being effective. I want to build their support very proactively for the change that you want. Which means very often we have to be strategic about the communication. And then finally, we empower action and ensure accountability. That's the follow-up piece. Those are the 5 things that have to be accomplished. They don't occur in necessarily a specific order. So now let's talk about resistance. The reality is, if there is no resistance, there is no change, or at least it's not significant change. If people could change easily and overnight, most of us would decide to wake tomorrow and have something decidedly different about ourselves. It's hard to do. I want you to understand that the presence of resistance is a good thing. And if we believe that, that means resistance is your friend. Now, think about this for a second. Let's make an assumption. Everyone, or at least the majority of people within the organization, want to do a good job for the organization. They want to do what's right. They want to be effective. They want to be successful. They want their company, their community, their country to be successful. And if we believe that, and let's allow for the 5 to 10% who don't, but let's focus on the 90 to 95% who do. That means anything that shows up as resistance is a legitimate question or a legitimate concern. And if we buy into that assumption, that the resistance that we're experiencing is a legitimate question or a legitimate concern. My concern is I give up my status. My concern is I give up my sense of belonging and my identity. My question is, I'm not sure how we can make this work. Yes, it would be a wonderful idea if we could make it happen, but I'm not sure how to make it work. Those are all legitimate questions that we as change leaders should then be addressing, because if we hear it from one individual, chances are we hear it from the others are thinking it. Now, the trick is you can't allow the organization to be paralyzed by resistance. We have to move quickly. So there will come a point in time where we say, I understand, we've addressed that. It's time to move on. We need someone to move on. But initially, resistance is your friend. So here are 4 tips that I've learned over the years. First off, try never to be surprised by resistance, which means when I'm implementing change, I go through and strategically ask people within the organization, specifically in the middle of the organization, what resistance should I expect or might I expect? The reason I choose the middle is this. The middle of organizations is where change goes to die. At the top of the organization, people get it, they buy it in strategically, they've set the vision, it's their idea. At the bottom of the organization, very often people might have questions, but at some level, they're just going to do what they're going to do. But they'll do what they're told. But the people in the middle of the organization, mid-managers especially, have the ability to influence how change is implemented. So I'm going to spend a great deal of time there understanding up front what their resistance might be. The second thing, when you experience resistance, especially initially, our inclination is to push back. If you can imagine 2 people hand to hand, and you tell the person on the right to push, chances are the person on the left automatically pushes back. But we only told the person on the right to push. What I want you to think about is, instead of pushing back, which is our human tendency, I want you to pull by asking questions. That's interesting. How does that work? Tell me what you mean. Third, focus on the goal. The steps are less important than the goal. Look for ways to incorporate others' interest in the steps. And finally, I realize that from time to time, resistance will show up in group settings. If you're not in the position to say, because I said so, you're now in a very vulnerable situation. You have to know when to stand your ground and when to live to fight another day. One technique that I have found is when one person gives me resistance in a group setting, assuming it's not the most senior leader, I might ask, does others of you feel the same way? Because if it's just one person, that will become obvious. On the other hand, if I'm in a group of 10 people and 8 out of the 10 feel the same way, that's something that we need to stop and address. Hopefully those are helpful. Let's talk about what is the future. The scariest change on the horizon is the one that you don't see coming. So one of the things that I suggest to all my clients these days is spend time thinking about what's next. And the two questions to ask are, what if and what's next? What if and what's next? And you're always wanting to be out there thinking about that. As I look at risk management in the future, I think we have to move from the idea of working in silos to we're an integrated part of the business. And I want you to, first off, there's a mindset shift that goes with that. That I don't work in risk management. I work in the organization. My specialty is risk management, and it's integrated into everything that we do. I think over time, we have to move from detection to prevention. The world is moving too quick to be focused on on detection, which means as you grow in your career, you'll become less tactical, more strategic. And by strategic will mean how will risk management manipulate the levers that guarantee the organization's success? And that part that goes along with that move of reactive to proactive, asking, what if, what's next, what could happen? I don't know if any of you watch old American Westerns. But years ago, there was a TV show on called Wagon Train, and the story of the wagon train was literally wagons that caravanned across the prairie to settle. It was a very boring story. You know, it just happened. What'd you do today? We went 10 miles. But there were people that worked on the wagon train who were their job was the scouts. And the scouts were the people who rode out over the horizon every single day because we can see what's on this side of the horizon. They rode out over the horizon every day in search of two questions. Where is the water and where are the hostiles? Where are the things that will sustain us and feed us? Where are the hostiles that could hurt us? By risk as an assumption, there is some assumption of being able to only focus on risk. I want you to think about where are the opportunities. So with that, this might be a good time for us to stop, ask some questions. I'll show you a couple of closing slides just to sum up. So I'm going to stop my share for a moment. And if you would turn on the chat, we have about 7 or 8 minutes that we can spend on chat, on questions.
Okay, so if anyone has question, they can raise their hands. I can let them, speak.
I see a hand raised.
Yes, let me. Okay, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. I just have a question. In the beginning, you stated that we prepare people for things that they might be happening later on, right?
Right.
And you said that I think it's preparing them to be flexible if it happens.
That's a great point. Yes, part of is preparing them to be flexible when it happens. it's a very difficult point because we all have, it's where perspective comes in. Let me see if I can give you an example. One of my clients was the CEO of a food processing company when the pandemic hit.
Yeah.
And he responded very quickly, and his people responded very quickly.
So they
And
were.
yeah, so he was prepared. But one of the reasons why the people were so successful is because the leader was prepared. And when I talked to him about why, one of the things that he said was, I have been through worse in the past. And he had been head of food service for an airline when a catastrophe had hit the airline.
Oh my God.
And he, yeah, and so he, so for him, after a catastrophe had hit the airline, a pandemic was easy.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So
so it's one of those, we don't know how flexible we can be until we're forced into being more flexible. So with that, I mean, I think part of that preparation is flexibility. I think there's a missing piece that sometimes we forget. Um, no, I'm going to paraphrase this, but the leader Napoleon once said that leaders are purveyors of hope.
okay.
And so I want you to think about, maybe the idea is, yes, we want people to be flexible and we need them to be flexible. Some people are naturally that way. Other times, leaders, especially in crisis, have to provide hope and confidence, because with that comes the willingness to try new things.
That's
Does that
really
make
interesting.
sense?
Yeah, it does. So it's like you have to appear confident and you have to appear in the willpower that you can reach the goal, even though you know that there could be consequences or some milestones wouldn't be achieved.
Right. Yeah. And so if you think about leading change, maybe this is a good analogy for that. Imagine we're in a large room, a large hotel ballroom or conference center ballroom, all the lights are out, and you're the leader, and the only light that you have is the light that shines from your phone. Um, and now we're going to lead people from one end to the ballroom to the other. How confident are you at that point as the leader of what is at the end of the destination? Probably not very, because you
Yeah,
can't see that far. But as the leader, our job is to know what's far enough ahead. I don't have to know the entire journey. I just have to know what's next to bring people with me to there. And then as they get to where I am, then I've lighted the way to the next milestone, and to the next milestone, and to the next milestone. Um, so that, again, I'm continually providing hope. The other thing to consider is, the more people go through change, the easier it is for them to change.
yeah, the harder, like, yeah, that is actually really true.
Right?
Honest.
And so the best way to get people comfortable with changing, let's change a lot. Let's change all the time, which is somewhat counterintuitive.
Yeah.
Uh, it, but one of my clients told me that after the pandemic hit, with a closure happened, they implemented their 5-year technology plan in about 5 weeks.
Wow.
And I asked them why, how did they move so quickly? And they said 6 months prior to that, they had experienced a cyber attack. And so
Oh,
because of that, they knew how to respond quickly, because they had practice responding quickly.
I think there is another question. Let's see here.
That's Shukadel.
Okay. Go ahead, Arij.
Hello, Mr. Randy.
Hello.
Thank
Thank you very much for hosting us. Okay, my question is how can leaders foster a culture of innovation and positive change? Especially in work environments that are deeply rooted in tradition and resistant to change.
It's a great question. And you've said a
Thank you.
magic word for me, and that is culture.
Yes.
Let's define culture for a moment. The culture are the habits displayed over time. And if you think about that, every organization has a culture, every country has a culture, family has a culture, and that culture is rooted in our habits. Now, what drives our habits? Well, one of the things that drives is our beliefs. Our assumptions drive our habits um, just as much as beliefs. So, if we're trying to foster a culture of change and a culture of innovation, it's unfortunate. I think sometimes to foster that, we have to change the definition of change. Um, for most of us, we think of changing as adapting. When I got married, my wife said to me, Randy, I'll never ask you to change. And I thought, cool. And then she went on to say, I do expect that you'll continually adapt. And for many of us, that's how we deal with change. But I think the best organizations for innovation and that foster that culture don't think about change as something that we are adapting to. They think about it as the steps necessary to pursue to reach our vision. Now, once we think of, first off, reframe it that way. The second is remember what creates habits: structure, process, system. So if I want to create innovation, if I want a culture of innovation, but I never budget for innovation, it's going to be very difficult for that to happen. If all of my internal processes make innovation so difficult because of all the bureaucratic um, hoops that we have to jump through, it makes it difficult. So we have to look at aligning process, structure, and system. And then finally go back to we have to make it important. I mean, results occur when we inspect what we expect. We could spend another hour on that whole topic. So maybe we come back and do that another time.
Sure, sure. I think there is another question here.
Yes.
Shog, let's see. Let's allow the mic. Go ahead.
First of all, thank you, Mr. Randy, for giving us so much of your time. We truly appreciate it. So my question is, you told us to always think about what if or what's next.
Yes.
Don't you think the question what if or what's next can sometimes be negative, and how can we present it in a positive way?
Yes, I agree. It sometimes can be negative. When I look at the world right now, from my perspective at least, I look at a world that I think is very much at an inflection point, and it could go either way, very positive or very negative. So I think that we have to acknowledge that part of what's possible is negative. Now, what would be the alternative to that? So if what's next is negative, and I don't want that to happen, now that raises another set of questions. One is, what would it look like for it to go correctly? What would it look for it to be right? What's the positive outcome that I would rather have? Second, what things have to go absolutely right for those positive outcomes to occur? Because those are the things I want to focus on. And then third, what can't go wrong? Because those are the risks that I want to avoid. But it starts with what's next and what else. But then from there, if that's negative, part of the leader's job is to reframe that into how could we make that positive? I see a world right now where change is happening very quickly. There's a great deal of uncertainty. The world is becoming more complex. That's the water in which we swim, so to speak. Um, but when people drown, it's not the water's fault. And our job as leaders is to prepare people to swim and succeed in that environment. So, yes, absolutely. Did
Thank you
that
very
answer
much.
your question?
Yes, very. I agree with you right now. I'm agreeing.
Good, thank you. It's okay if you don't, but I appreciate that you do.
Yeah, thank you very much, Randy. Let's see if there is another one. I think there is no more question, Randy. If you wanna,
Yeah, let me close up then
yeah,
by offering this. My experiences, change and transformation don't fail because of faulty management. We know how to do change management. We know the processes and the steps and the charters, and we know how to do those things. They fail because of faulty leadership. And faulty leadership is the influence that allows things to happen, in a positive manner. So I want you to, if I can leave you with this, commit to being a positive influence in your organization. You do that through your competence, through your credibility, through the consistency of your efforts, through the strength of your character, through the effectiveness of your communication. That's how you develop your own credibility, if you will. And I think that part of leading change, especially if you're not at the top, so as we're moving our way, part of leading change is you want to be that person that when you walk through the organization, everyone looks at you and says, he or she casts a positive shadow. That's the goal. So again, thank you all so much for your time. I appreciate it. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I hope it's been beneficial. If you're on LinkedIn, um, please connect. If you're on Facebook, please connect. If you follow on Medium, I write there on occasion. I appreciate it so very much.
thank you very
I
much,
can stick
Randy.
around and ask you more questions if you want, but thank you very much. I know I don't want to cut into your evening more.
Thank you very much, Randy. You've been giving us so much valuable information that are not that it's very practical to today's world. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you very much, Randy.